Yeah, because understanding site and context, solves half of your work, right? You just need to have a good idea later. So we're going to talk about that. This lecture looks at how design, architecture, and art negotiate the notion of site. So the question is, what is site? What is specific to the site? What does it mean to act in relation to the site? Yeah, and how are those acts related to spatial design practices? Yeah. So we now know what is the site and how art started going towards specificity, right? So we start again. We keep talking about art, but because the development of the art after the Second World War is very interesting, and at one point it meets architecture, right? So the work of art in its traditional form used to be on a pedestal or hanging off the wall, like those two, yeah? The relationship of artwork and its site. Bless you. So you see? When somebody sneezes, we say truth. Yeah? So if you sneeze while I'm reading this, it has to be true. Yeah? Okay. So the relationship of artwork and its site starts to change at the wake of minimalism in the late 60s and 70s. This is Fluxus and all the art practices, several art practices were happening then. The pure idealist space of dominant modernism was radically displaced by the materiality of the natural landscape, or the impure and ordinary space of the everyday, which is the spaces in which you all made your works today. Yeah? The space of art was no longer perceived as the blank slate or that wall, or an empty canvas, a tabula rasa in Latin, but a real space. Yeah, you have to deal with real people, yeah, real things, real conditions. The art objects or event in this context was to be experienced in the here and now. Yeah, so it's space-time. Yeah, through the bodily. This is really important. Through the bodily present of each viewing subject, which is audience, in a sensorial immediacy, so you see immediately what you're, rather than through internet, of spatial extensions and temporal duration. So it works in spatial extension, 3 dimensions, yeah, temporal duration, time, yeah, so 4 dimensions. So it is really important that it happens in the real space, here now, in 4 dimensions, yeah. This is what happened to art when it moved out to the galleries, yeah. So artists, by site-specific work, start to criticize what is a museum, how is a work of art supposed to be exhibited, yeah? What is the value of the work of art, its permanence, yeah? Materiality or the meaning of the work, yeah? As for example, works of land art movement, like that one. Do you know what land art is? Land art is the best, yeah? Land art means you go out and you make works in nature, yeah? And you make big things or small things. You work on a branch, you work with in the desert, you work with the sea. You can do so many things, but it's man and the environment, yeah? And you don't do anything practical, yeah? You do things because they just have a meaning. It's an idea, yeah? So it is really interesting because this movement is actually critiquing the art world of the perfect white cube, yeah? So Spiral Jetty, this is called. And this is a great artist, you can look up his other works. Spiral Jet is an earthwork sculpture constructed in April 1970 on the shore of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, in America, right? The sculpture is built of mud, salt, basalt rocks, and water. The sculpture forms a counterclockwise coil coming from the shore of the lake. The sculpture is sometimes visible and sometimes it's submerged, depending on the water level of the lake. This work wanted to criticize ephemerality, specificity, and declare its independence from the art institutions, yeah? So it exists as it does, without the need for a museum, yeah? And if you go back in time, like 5,000 years ago, right? Or 10,000 years ago, people did this sort of massive land art. No one needed a museum, and they would basically, in Latin America, they had these massive figures drawn in sand that you could not see from anywhere but from space. So it's like, how do you actually perceive the work of art without having an airplane, right? Very interesting questions back then. Yeah? Okay. So, and of course, another famous site-specific artist, Gordon Matta Clark, is actually an architect who did not practice architecture. You've seen this, because he considered it a pretentious enterprise. Yeah. So who are you to come and design buildings for us and tell me how to live my life? Yeah. Instead, he devised an architecture, right? An alternative use of buildings, entailing a rejection of what he called the functionalist aspect of past-due machine-age moralist. Yeah, so basically he doesn't want to design functional spaces at all, right? So what he does with this conical intersect, he cuts a whole conical shape through a 17th century townhouse located in the Parisian district of Les Halles, and that was about to be demolished. The whole area was about to be demolished. So you see the houses are vacated. Yeah, who covered this artist before, or we didn't? Anyway, so basically the thing is, the area was to be demolished because they were about to construct the Georges Pompidou Center, right? Which is a big cultural center in Paris. So this act signified that the work is outside of the museum, and the museum that is going to be in the place of the artwork itself. It emphasized the specificity of this location, the alteration and destruction of materiality that comes not only from cutting the building but demolishing it in order to erect a new one. Yeah? And the role of an architect and artist in this circle of destruction and creation. Yeah? So by doing this, he creates a work of art on a piece of architecture that's going to be demolished to create a new space to house new works of art. It's like, right? But what he tries is to basically raise awareness that work of art is to be specific. It's not to be indoors in this non-specific space. And it's very much, as he considers it, tied to architecture because that's our built environment. Yeah? Site as physical reality, right? So site-specific art, whether it's inside a white cube or out in the Nevada desert, whether architectural or landscape-oriented, initially took the same text. Yeah. Initially took the site as the actual location, a tangible reality. Its identity composed of a unique combination of constitutive physical elements: length, depth, height, texture, shape of the walls and rooms, scale and proportion of plazas, buildings or parks, existing conditions of lighting, yeah, ventilation, traffic patterns, distinctive topographical features. Yeah. So all these form a site. All these give you information about the site. Yeah. Whether you're in the desert or in the city, regardless, everything has, can be measured, can be described, can be, drawn. Everything can be drawn, right? And this is actually an example that serves to examine both the site as materiality and site as relationships, right? Really important. So site is not only a physical space, yeah, but it's the relationships that happen there, right? Between elements that compose it, yeah? Be it people, be it buildings, yeah? In 1981, Richard Serra, do you know Richard Serra, the artist? Oh, write the name, big sculptures, very nice. Architects love him, yeah? Installs his sculpture called Tilted Arc in Federal Plaza in New York City, yeah? Right outside the government building, yeah? Of course, he didn't do it overnight. It was placed there, yeah? With the agreement of the building, yeah? It was commissioned by the Arts in Architecture program of the U.S. General Service Administration. So the government had a program, Arts in Architecture. They installed this, yeah? And those working in the surrounding buildings must walk around the enormous size of this to go through the plaza. So the work basically blocked the plaza in half. Do you see it there? How basically, so the buildings are here and they had to go across and they could not, yeah? So it completely, they're walking around it, yeah? So completely changes the way the public space is used and perceived, right? So you are aware of this thing in public space. You have to navigate the public space with full awareness. You can't just go. You have to say, make a decision whether you go left, whether you go right, and you keep thinking about this thing all the time while you're walking, yeah, because it's either in your way or you like it, yeah. So according to the author, this is the point. the viewer becomes aware of himself and of his movement through the plaza. As he moves, the sculpture changes. Contraction and expansion of the sculpture results in the viewer's movement. Step by step, the perception not only of the sculpture, but of the entire environment changes. And I think much of that you have actually managed to achieve through your little exercises, yeah? So, which is, I mean, for me, it's really nice to see that I'm reading this text